Good morning. Welcome to Bay Area Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Reverend Katie McQuage-Loukas, and my pronouns are she and hers. Today, I was a little bit nervous. I didn't know how many people would brave the weather, but today is a question box service, so I do need your questions. So be thinking about your questions about Unitarian Universalism, or the state of our world, or really any question you want to ask me. I don't promise to answer every question you ask, but I will look at every question you ask and answer the ones I can. And normally, I don't worry about telling folks to silence their cell phones, but as somebody who got startled right out of my seat by an emergency alert earlier, I would suggest you silence your cell phones, although if one goes off, I understand, because they do come through even the do not disturb. So let's take a deep breath. Try to release some of the shoulder tension some of us might have due to the weather. Take another deep breath. And take a moment to maybe look around at our friends and our companions this morning and be appreciative that we all came out in this weather and that we are all here together. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived here today in body, in mind, in heart, in spirit, whether you're joining us in person or online, if this is your first time, if it's your 500th time, wherever you are on your spiritual journey, however you came here today, we are glad that you are here and you are welcome here. I begin with some words from our gray hymnal. They are attributed to Kalidasa, I think probably more inspired by, "Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every day a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day."
Good morning. My name's Jerry. As you'll see, Verva was supposed to be here today, but she was under the weather, so I'm subbing. Barbara Brandon will light our chalice this morning. Get everything lit up. We gather this morning as one community, a community united by common ideals: love, justice, diversity, freedom, mutual care, equity. Yet look around. Look at the faces of those around you. Each face represents an individual, every one of us with our own story, needs, strengths, and faults. We light our chalice today honoring our common connection and also the uniqueness that lives within each of us. Please stand as you are willing and able for our opening hymn, number 126. We are here today in our religious community, connected not by a common creed, but by the promises and commitments we make to live together in freedom and faith. Our church covenant is a statement of how we hope to be in this world, a proclamation of the aspirations and affirmations we share for creating a society defined by compassion and love. The words are based on historic statements of faith written by late 19th century Unitarian James Villa Blake and 20th century Universalist L. Griswold Adams. Please join me in saying our shared promise to be together in a spirit of faith, freedom, and commitment. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek freedom in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship. Thus do we covenant with one another.
We have a responsive reading this morning, number 650 in the gray hymnal. Number 650, Cherish Your Doubts by Robert Weston. Please join in with me on the italicized text. Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the attendant of truth. Doubt is the key to the door of knowledge. It is the servant of discovery. A belief which may not be questioned binds us to error, for there is incompleteness and imperfection in every belief. Doubt is the touchstone of truth. It is an acid which eats away the false. Let no one fear for the truth that doubt may consume it, for doubt is a testing of belief. The truth stands boldly and unafraid. It is not shaken by the testing. For truth, if it be truth, arises from each testing stronger, more secure. Those that would silence doubt are filled with fear. Their houses are built on shifting sands. But those who fear not doubt and know its use are founded on rock. They shall walk in the light of growing knowledge. The work of their hands shall endure. Therefore, let us not fear doubt, but let us rejoice in its help. It is to the wise as a staff to the blind. Doubt is the attendant of truth.
Go out
Our Time for All Ages today is a miniature version of the question box for our children and youth. And looking around, I'm thinking that also needs to include the young at heart if I'm going to get some people up here. So if I could invite forward anybody who's feeling especially youthful today to help me out with explaining the question box, yeah? Oh. Somebody was ready. All right. I love it. All right, since I have a few people, I'm going to use the handheld and come down here. Are we on? Okay, good. I had told Steve I wasn't sure if I would use it and that he'd have to pay attention. So, when a minister has a whole lot of work to do, like at the end of the year or around Christmas time, we think to ourselves, how can we not write a sermon? And we also think to ourselves, there's a whole lot of questions that come up week after week, week after week. And we answer them as we go, but how many people haven't asked their questions? They haven't thought about it yet, or they haven't quite figured out a good time to ask. So this is the time. And for those of you who may have gone through OWL at some point, the question box gets used there every week. OWL is our sexuality education course. And those questions are the hardest to ask, especially for the different age groups that are doing OWL. It's not easy to ask those questions. And so we pass around a box, and in OWL, everybody puts a piece of paper in. I'm not going to make you do that if you don't have a question, but the idea is that we really can't tell who asks a question. And then people can ask things anonymously, things they might be embarrassed to ask because they feel like everybody else already knows or that it's a silly question. There are no silly questions, or even if there are, I'll answer them anyway. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass out paper to all these fine folks, and then you are going to write down your questions for me, and I'll answer them. And well, I don't really have any kids to sing out, so maybe we just pass them out, and then we save all of our questions for the actual question box. The goal was to answer a few early, so maybe I'll answer the ones that someone who shall remain unnamed has already slipped to me, because I can answer those while the paper gets passed out. So let's go ahead and pass out some paper. Oh, I think I gave Chris almost all the paper. Will you distribute some of that? And when the time comes, I have two boxes we can pass around. And so while that paper's going around, I'll answer these questions. The first question is, we keep talking about Article 2. What is Article 1? Which is such a good question. So Article 2 comes from our corporate governance bylaws, not the most exciting thing in the world. And Article 1 is literally just our name. We are the Unitarian Universalist Association. That's it, that's all Article 1 is. The other articles get a little more interesting, talking about how we do things and why we do things. But Article 1 is just our name, which is why Article 2 is our principles and our purpose. The second question I have is, where does the name Unitarian Universalist come from? And yes, if anybody thinks of a second question, maybe tear your page in half or come up and grab some paper. You can come up and grab paper at any time. So the name Unitarian Universalist, I'll work my way backwards. The Unitarians and the Universalists merged together in the 1960s. And I think the plan was to come up with a shared name, and they never quite managed it and became Unitarian Universalist. It wasn't entirely intentional. I think it was intended to be a little bit of a holding name, but it stuck because I think, being UUs, we had a little bit of trouble figuring out and agreeing on how to define ourselves. The name Unitarian comes from the belief that there is not a holy trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Some people in mostly the 18th and 19th century in the United States, although it has popped up historically many times, but the particular forebearers of our Unitarian movement, our 18th and 19th century folks, mostly in New England and on the East Coast, said, you know, the scripture's not super clear about how all of this works. So we really think that there's one God and that the other details are hard to understand and mysterious, and we're not going to commit to any kind of doctrine about the Trinity. And that's that seed being planted of our resistance to doctrine and making people believe particular things. The Universalists were happening around the same time, although they too pop up over and over again in history. And the Universalists also questioned doctrine, and they were questioning how salvation worked. And they decided that their God was too powerful to let anyone be damned. No one could do anything so terrible that God could not save them. And so they believed in various forms of universal salvation, although it looked differently from church to church and person to person. And since you have these two groups that are both pushing back a little bit against the idea that there's only one right way to believe, the doors got cracked open a little bit wider and a little bit wider over time to allow in a variety of beliefs, and then to allow in many, many, many different beliefs. And so when the time came and they realized they were working together a whole lot, they said, why don't we become one? Because even though we don't quite believe the same things, we're both really big umbrellas. And so they created one extra large umbrella that holds what we are becoming today. I don't think we're going to sing the kiddos out. So I suppose, yes. We will send around questions to be picked up after the reading right before, or no, we should do it earlier so we have a chance to look. Are we ready? Have people already thought of questions? We can certainly go around with the box now, but I think people are going to come up with more questions. Okay, we're going to wait. We will send the box around probably right before the reading. I think that will be the best time. So that's what we'll do. And now I have to remember my place because I'm so used to singing the children out that now I'm all the candles. Great. This will also give us more time to meditate upon our questions. So this is the time in our service where we bring forward all of our cares. And I feel like this week there are a lot of cares. There's the weather, there's our politics, there are many, many things. So we come with joys and sorrows, hopes, fears, milestone celebrations, all of these things that make up the pieces of our lives. I will be lighting a candle today for everyone in the path of the storm, the people of the Windward Islands, Jamaica, the Yucatan, and possibly for us as well. And so I invite you forward now as you are moved to light candles of your own for yourself, for the world, for a loved one. Whatever you bring, know that we will witness it and hold it with you for a time. We'll light one final candle for all who are not with us this morning, for our friends who are traveling or hunkering down at home, for people who may be watching online with concerns and joys of your own. We light that last candle. Please join in with me in prayer. Infinite mystery, the spaces between the stars and the gaps between us as persons hold mysterious depth and wonder. At this moment, many of us have heavy hearts or fluttering, anxious hearts. This morning and all this week, we have held grief and anxiety, fear for our democracy, fear that we might be losing a nation that represents its people, fear of the oligarchy recklessly seizing power. Let us feel our righteous fury as empowerment. Let love and anger drown out despair. Let us never be numb to our losses. Let us rather be moved, be inspired to fight back and to work to create a better world than even the one we are losing. May we remember that nations are imaginary lines on a map. May we remember that empires do crumble, and that no matter what happens, we will always have the power to care for our neighbors, and that we may work to stretch that definition ever wider until we hold the world in our arms. We pray this morning for all the people in the path of the storm, impacted and not yet impacted, for those islanders who do not ordinarily see the full wrath of wind, and for those of us who wait nervously, wondering how sure we are about the track and when the storm might turn. We pray for ourselves this morning for our own safety when the rains and winds come and as waters rise. We know, if not now, then soon, because it's part of the nature of our lives here on the Gulf waters. As we hold all these things in our hearts, we remember that we have one another, that no matter what may come, we will not face it alone. May the joys and comforts of friends and family, of comrades and loved ones carry us through, now and always. Amen, and may it be so. Please join me in our sung prayer, our meditation hymn, Spirit of Life. It's number 123 in the gray hymnal. Please remain seated. Boxes now, and then we'll do the reading. And we have 2 boxes, so we'll just go down the aisle and gather what we can. off from. It's a lot of questions. So I promise you now that since we know I won't get through every single one of those questions, that I will save them, and they might appear in newsletter columns or something. So I'll give this a good shake, and then we'll have our reading.
Our reading today is by Rainer Marie Rilke. Have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for the answers, which could not be given to you now, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday, far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer.
Good reminder that there will always be questions unresolved. And that's why we're here, because we love unresolved questions. But I'll try to resolve a few of them. Ooh. So our first question is, what is UU spirituality? And I think I had already put a ringer question in there. What would it look like to be a devout UU? So clearly I was already thinking about this, because that's one of those questions that comes up when people talk to me about being new and wondering what's next. I'm here, how do I deepen myself? And I think that UU spirituality is a combination of things, because we each come in with something, some practice in our heritage perhaps. Some people reject their past, but some people carry it in with them. And so I definitely think of us as a both-and kind of place, where people bring in many things they already have. But I think the distinctively UU part are the things we do together. That includes worshiping together on Sunday morning, but I think, and I really mean it when I say things like coffee hour. I know we joke that that's the UU communion, but it's also a time when we connect. It's a time where we say, hi, how are you this morning? And that is such a sacred act. I think that the most sacred thing we do in the service are the candles, because again, that's relationship. You're watching your friend light a candle, you're wondering how they are. These things that bind us together as people and that deepen our relationships are such a meaningful spiritual practice in a world that is not necessarily relational all the time. And I think that the other piece of it is learning how to make meaning together, to make meaning out of our lives. And that happens in relationship, but it's also its own practice. And so I think that's the place where what we do here and maybe other things we do come together. Our meditation practices, people may have journaling practices or prayer practices, and I think there's a back and forth where what we do alone, we bring into this space, and what we do here goes back out with us. And that's where we start to say, well, what does my life mean? And I think that's the other part of UU spirituality. And I might be able to come up with some more things, but off the top of my head, that's what I got. How can we heal and find peace as individuals in a fragmented world that is being destroyed around us? That is the question, right? But that's not just the question we have to answer right now. That's the question that human beings have always had to answer. Because I think the world has always been dangerous. There have always been wars and conflict. I took a class on the Holy Spirit and spirituality, and we read Julian of Norwich. And she lived in a time where there had been 2 terrible wars in living memory, and she lived in the middle of the Black Plague. And I looked around thinking, wow, we just had COVID. We always have some terrible war or other happening overseas. The life that Julian of Norwich was living was not that different from my own, and yet she was preaching a message of healing and hope. And so I thought, yeah, I think religion, we're doing the same things because we're still living very human lives. It's just what we do. We come together and we say, the world is really hard. How do we get through it together? And I think it's the together part that really keeps us going when times are hard. I'm also reminded of Forest Church. He was a minister in New York for many, many years. And he said that religion arose because we have to cope with the dual realities of being alive and having to die. Living is hard and dying is inevitable. How do we cope? We come together, we talk about it, we make meaning, and we try to create a place from which we can do our part to heal the world, and that heals us. UU is a Protestant part of Christianity, that is true. The Lutherans are Protestants, the Baptists, the Methodists. What ties them together, makes them different, and what makes them argumentative? So by its nature, to be Protestant is to protest. And by its nature, we are so tightly bound. In fact, the Universalists come out of the old Baptist traditions. And there are quite a few Unitarian Universalists who are also Methodists. There are several ministers who are duly ordained. So we actually do have some overlap, places where we come together. The common joke that I always make when people at seminary would ask me who we are and what we do, because this is a joke that a seminarian will understand, is what if the Reformation just kept going and never stopped? We just kept throwing things out, and throwing some more things out, and we're going to throw that out too. And now what are we left with? And again, I return to the answer is each other and covenant and being together, because we are part of that Reformation heritage. I do think we've carried it all the way to the end point where we are fully, I would say, post-Christian, because we've become something else along the way. But yes, all of those basically non-Catholic, all of those Protestant clusters are various strands, I guess, on the tree. So they've all branched off, but they all come from that urge to, I think, strip away what is unnecessary and find what is essential and important. And so each of those traditions has a slightly different answer to that question of what is essential and important, and that's why they're different. But I think that we're the same in that we're part of that seeking, and that we believe that we can figure out some of those answers for ourselves, and we don't need to be told all of those answers. That's a very simple answer to a complicated question, but I hope it's a little bit of a glimpse. Thank you. For somebody who doesn't like to do extemporaneous preaching, I do actually like the question box service, because I think I just have to come up with a quick one. What are your favorite things to eat? I was going to make a joke about skipping personal questions, but that was okay, because somebody might try to feed me, and I want them to know. Pizza, definitely pizza. I'm also a really, really big fan of Chinese food and Thai food and Vietnamese food. What else do I love? Chris, one of my favorite things to eat. I mean, I eat Tex-Mex constantly, but I think that's just, I'm a Texan. So, yeah, I think that really, Oh, etouffee. When I was vegan, we would make it with chickpeas, and so even now I still put chickpeas in my etouffee. I want it to be full of gravy, and yes, I do love etouffee. And we do a lot of Cajun cooking at home. When did you know that you would like to be a minister? This is kind of a funny question, because I do have a distinct memory of being a kid and going to church with a friend and thinking, wow, I really like church. But I also thought, I don't believe any of these things, so I guess church isn't for me. I really appreciated the opportunity to go, and I kind of put it out of my mind. And then the first time I walked into a UU church, I had that, oh, there is a church that's for me. And that was the seed. That was the little piece. And I think it grew very slowly over time as I saw the different things that a minister does over the course of the week, because it's a lot more than Sunday morning. And I was really intimidated by bits and pieces. But I was working as a paralegal at the time. And I was on the phone working with clients day in and day out. And there was a day that flowers came. And people on the search committee have heard this story because it really is important to me. But this beautiful bouquet of flowers shows up at the office thanking us for everything we'd done. And it's a client, we had lost their case. We didn't win. And I had been devastated. The lawyer and I were both just devastated by it. We really thought we had this one. For those of you who don't know, disability law is not like any other kind of law. It's basically appeals, and the courts assume goodwill on the part of the insurance companies. And so only about 20% of cases are successful. So it's a very difficult, emotionally difficult practice. Being able to pick and choose our cases meant that we had a higher success rate, but it was still really hard. And when we asked, what are you so great, but why did you send us? We lost. And the client said, no one else listened to me. You held my hand. You literally held my hand. The paralegals were always there when I called. You sat next to me. You heard my whole story more than once, and you were with me. And I realized that's the part I want to do. I don't actually want to be writing the first draft of the brief or doing the editing or making sure all the mail is it. No, I want to be accompanying people in their lives. And that's when I thought, maybe church being my favorite thing and wanting to accompany people, I think there's a job that includes these things. And so that's a big part of my journey. There are some other moments along the way, but I think those were the big ones. Let's see. I'm trying to pull out my ringer questions because I don't need them. These are two about my own beliefs. Do you believe in God, and what do you believe happens after we die? So I don't often talk about that on a personal level because I know that we're all bringing a lot of different things in here. I would say that there is something that many people would call God that I would not necessarily name as such, but I do believe that there is a creative force underlying the universe, that there is movement there. And I don't think it's personal, and I don't think that I can necessarily have a personal relationship with it per se, but I think that by trying to pay attention and observe and encounter, be that through meditation or prayer, I can orient myself to it and live a better life. As for believing about an afterlife, that's the big question mark, and I don't know. And the joke is, I'll let you know when I find out. So yes, I actually do not have a belief about an afterlife per se. I will say there are times when I absolutely sense my grandmother's presence, so I think there's something. But I do not have a specific belief myself. What is your favorite UU story from history? I think I'm deeply moved by Norbert Čapek's story of staying with his people during World War II. Even though it ultimately meant his death, he stayed, he would not come, he wouldn't escape. And I think I'm also deeply moved by the Sharps, who were the UU couple who did the most of the refugee work during that time period and went multiple times to Europe to personally, I think the wife, Mrs. Sharp, personally led a group of children, one of the kindergarten caravans out of Germany. And I think those are my favorite UU stories because they speak to our capacity to do something, to do anything in the face of something so historically monstrous. They speak to the power of showing up. And I might have a different answer on another day, but given the current state of our politics, that's where my mind is, the power of showing up. How can our congregations attract younger people? If I knew that, I'd be a millionaire. Seriously, I could have a consulting business for every UU church in the country. I think there's a couple of things that come into play when I do talk to our young folks. I think one of the things we're not good at as a movement, this church is fairly good at it, but as a movement, our communities are not good at it, is retaining our young people. Most congregations, most religious movements shed a whole lot of youth. They go to other traditions, they stop going to church at all. We actually have the highest rate, though. We lose 90-something% of our young people. And I have a couple of reasons why I think that is. I think what our young people do in the RE wing and what we do in here, there's a gap, and we don't always bridge it well. so they may not feel like there's a place for them in adult UUism. And I think sometimes, too, they get impatient with us because they're ready to do things we're not ready to do. They are young and idealistic, and I remember that feeling. I'm not that far removed from it. But as far as attracting from outside, I think that the biggest barrier is that it's hard to make a case for why church is necessary when we don't have a belief system and we don't have an argument that you have to be saved from something or by someone. We don't have that, and so it's a harder sales pitch. And I think that people who, and this is not just young people, this is all of the spiritual but not religious, and the people, they call them the nuns, who just check none of the above on the list. A lot of people have said, well, why? I don't need to go to church, so I won't. And so I think we can attract more people if we can make an affirmative case, not just, you don't have to believe anything to be here. But being here matters, and this is why it matters, and this is what it can do for you, and this is what you can do for it, and this is what we can do in the world. Because I do think that's what younger folks are responding to. They have things to do in the world, and they want to do them now, and we can help them do that now. And many times our interests are aligned, and I think that we just need to make that case that church matters. It was a little bit easier several decades ago when you felt like you had to go to some kind of church, so you might as well go to the UU church. And now I think we have to make a case for that deeper level of commitment. What real purpose is saying our covenant? This is a deeper question about worship in the way that I'm going to answer it, but I think it matters that we embody what we're committed to, that we say the words. We don't just read them or hear them or think them, but we put them in our own mouths and we say them out loud, and they become part of us in that way. And that's true of every moment, and that's why I do responsive readings, and that's why we sing, is that's an opportunity to really engage on that body level with what's happening in worship. And also, week to week, we need a reminder, because sometimes we forget who we want to be in the world, and we get caught up in the day-to-day and the odds and ends and work and school and all of the different things we're doing. And one of the purposes of church, but also of saying our covenant, is to remind ourselves of who we want to be. Let's see. I'm not going to get to them all because it's quarter till, but I think I have time for one or two more. Why is the source still referred to as male? Well, that actually depends on where you are and what you're doing. May I talk about Unilus? Okay, so Chris worked as an administrator at a Lutheran church in Cambridge for several years before we moved back. And one of the things they did is they went through, and every single reference to a gendered God was either balanced or made neutral, one of the two. And so, was there mother language in the traditional Our Father sometimes? I feel like God our Father, God our Mother, God's self instead of himself, things like that. So depending on where you are, there are a lot of versions of things that tweak that, and that is outside of Unitarian Universalism. I think within UUism, there are two approaches. Some people go with the neutral approach, the stripping away of gendered language. And I think many of us, and I include myself in this, try to include as many different images of God as possible, with the idea that there is someone in this room for whom God the Father may still be a valuable image. And there's someone in this room who really needs God to be a mother. And there's someone who needs God to be the sea. And there's someone who needs the divine in a myriad of shapes and forms. And so that's the thing I try to be mindful of, is that there are different points of meaning throughout. I feel like I had one more piece that I was going to say, and I've lost track of it. Oh, no. That's okay. If it's important, it'll come back to me. But so I think that retaining some masculine language is important to people, to not reject it entirely, especially if we can bring in all those elements of masculinity that are nurturing and caring or protective or fierce, all of those things. And I think it's just as important to talk about a nurturing, protective, and fierce mother, and also to talk about a God that is beyond anything like gender. I think those things are important. Oh, and I have remembered what I was going to refer to. This again, I'm going back to those medieval Christian women. There was a strong movement of referring to Jesus as mother, because Jesus feeds from their body, which is an interesting conceptual place. But seeing Jesus as the nurturing, enfolding part of the Trinity was very meaningful to medieval women, even beyond, Mary, the mother of God. So I just thought I would share that mental image with you of the body and blood, also including the breast. How has your background and education prepared you for this moment in time? I don't know if a person could be prepared for this moment in time politically, but I'm doing my best. I think that actually what prepares us the most is less what we do in the classroom, it's the field work. I was still finishing up my hospital chaplaincy internship when COVID hit. I was there in the hospitals when people started coming in and they started putting tents in the park. And so that was very formative. And then to be doing my internship at the same time in a congregation that was not yet meeting in person, I think probably gave me more digital skills than any ministers. I think all of us in that cohort ended up with more digital skills than any ministers before had ever had. And so I think those were the most formative things. But I think that what the seminary education and my undergraduate education and other things do for me is they fill the well. Like I have this well full of things to draw on week to week to week. And it's there if I need it. And I can remember, oh, so-and-so wrote about that, and I can go immerse myself. So I have a really good bibliography and a really good mental map of the landscape. And I think that's what education does for all of us, is it gives us the map of the landscape, because we won't learn all the things we need to know, but we know how to go find the things we need to do. And I still have my people. I also found all of my people. I still have phone calls at least once a week with a lot of my seminarian friends, and we say, what's going on at your church right now? Have you encountered this thing? And then what are you doing about? And that's huge. That peer network is hugely helpful. And I'm going to do one more. In UUism, we don't talk about individual responsibility. We don't talk much about individual responsibility and free will. What is the place of these ideas in UUism? I think this is a big thing happening right now, especially as part of those Article 2 conversations that are popping up. This idea that we need to figure out being accountable and what we are willing to do, and balancing that with our free will is a difficult question. It's that question of what do I owe my community, what do I owe the world? And what does my community owe me as in terms of support and a place of belonging? And so I think that's one of those places of creative tension, where the tension between my individual freedom and my accountability, that's where I grow. That's part of that that friction is part of our growth. And I think that it's one of those things we don't often talk about because it's not really amenable to the most interesting or exciting sermon. I can't really, off the top of my head, come up with a good, how do I tell this as a story? But I think it underlies a lot of the more issue-specific questions, and I think that's where it comes up. I think if you look for it, whenever we're talking about justice issues and what's going on in the world, that's where those things come up. And there are still a lot of questions in here, and so I will keep my promise to you that I will hold on to these. And they will make appearances at some point or other. There might even be a seed of a sermon. You might get a whole sermon out of it if you're lucky. So I'll go ahead and say that's it from me for today. And thank you so much for playing along with my game here, because it's fun for me to be able to do this. Thank you. Thank you very much. I joke that the other reason I became a minister is because I can talk for 20 minutes about anything. It's a skill. And where else can I use that skill? This is the point in our service where we shift to a place of generosity and gratitude, because what you give on Sunday morning is one of the things that supports us and that keeps us going week after week and enables us to be here together to do all the things that we need to do. So please give as generously as you are able, and we will receive the offering in gratitude.
There are many ways in which our community lives out our mission to change lives and heal the world. Here are just a few of those ways. Oh, please join me in blessing our offering. This gift from the abundance of my life blesses me, our ministries, and the world. A ton of thanks to those who contributed to our Kids' Meals DIY Lunches project. We have secured enough donations to provide for 100 lunches, and this past Sunday, the youth were able to decorate and fill 20 bags in working toward that goal. We have tentatively scheduled Friday, August 2nd as the day we will take a field trip to Kids' Meals, located in the Heights, and deliver the lunches to the charity. Stay tuned for permission slips and times. Today, please join us at 12:30 outside on the sidewalk as we honor the memory of Laura Dean. You are invited. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, so we will honor Laura Dean today inside. Will there be drums? Okay, drums are available for anyone who wishes to play. Calling all young adults, please join us this Saturday, July 13th from 7 to 9 p.m. in Cockrell Hall for a game night. Feel free to bring your favorite board game, card game, puzzle, or any other activity you think might be fun. We will provide snacks and drinks. Next Sunday, families, parents, and children, bring your appetite and a dish to share for a delightful family potluck lunch. Join us after coffee and fellowship at 12:30 in Cockrell Hall for a fun-filled gathering. While the children play and are cared for, parents can engage in meaningful discussions about parenting topics. Don't miss out on this perfect blend of food, fun, and parenting insights. Immediately after today's service, members and friends are invited to join us to mingle over coffee and enjoy light snacks in Cockrell Hall. If you would like to donate snacks or help with the setting them out, please use the sign-up sheet available in Cockrell Hall. Let's come together and share some quality time as a community. And finally, here at Bay Area UU Church, we understand the importance of staying connected with our community. That's why we offer a weekly newsletter every Tuesday with the latest news and events happening in our church. Don't miss out on the opportunity to engage in meaningful activities and connect with fellow members. You can sign up for our email list today using the QR code on the screen or by going to bauuc.org and join our community of spiritual growth, fellowship, and fun. Thank you for being a vital part of our congregational life. Please join us after the service, as we discussed before, in Cockrell Hall and here in the sanctuary, which is around, well, Cockrell Hall is around the corner. I had to change that. Pardon me. And for our closing song, please stand as you are willing and able for number 354. We laugh, we cry.
my friends. Learn to love the questions, carry them with you in your heart, even when they are not resolvable, and love them anyway. Go in peace, and blessed be.